Welcome, everyone, to our latest EdSource Roundtable. My name is Ann Vasquez, CEO of EdSource. California is home to the largest population of English learners in the country. 2 in 5 students in the state's public schools speak a language other than English at home. While progress has been made addressing the needs of these students and the teachers who work with them, California still has a long way to go to help those students. Today, we'll hear from valued voices in and out of the classroom about what schools can be doing to help these students and educators. If you haven't already, we encourage you to follow us on Twitter and to sign up for our daily newsletter. It's a great way to stay in the know. And I also would like to plug our podcast, Education Beat. A new episode is out today. Lastly, EdSource would like to thank Sobrado Philanthropies for making today's roundtable possible. Now for our introductions. First, I'd like to welcome to our panel Dr. Elvira Armas, Director of the Center for Equity for English Learners and affiliated faculty in the School of Education at Loyola Marymount University. Please also welcome Laura Barbosa, a parent of an English language learner and the Vice President of the District English Learner Advisory Committee for the San Leandro Unified School District. Next, I'd like to introduce Marina Berry, who teaches first grade at Sutherland Elementary School in Lodi Unified School District. I'd like to also welcome Nicole Thompson, who teaches 4th grade at McQuitty Elementary in the Pajaro Valley Unified School District. Finally, I'd also like to welcome Dr. Natalie Tran, a professor of education and director of the National Resource Center for Asian Languages at California State University, Fullerton. Thank you also to those working behind the scenes today who are helping answer your questions. And our moderator today is EdSource reporter and Education Beat host, Zadie Stabley. Welcome, everyone. Zadie, I'll hand things over to you.
Hi, everyone. Before we begin, I just want to say a word about terms. So in our coverage of this topic and our description of this roundtable, EdSource uses the term English learner because it's most widely known and recognized. But we recognize and know that students who are learning English also already speak other languages at home. And also that once students become proficient in English, they're no longer considered officially English learners. For these reasons, we know that many folks use terms such as emerging bilingual students or multilingual learners that recognize the wealth of knowledge that students already bring with them. So you might hear our panelists use some of those terms during the roundtable as well. We're going to be focusing a lot today on professional learning for teachers. And so I want to start off the roundtable with our 2 teachers, current teachers, Marina and Nicole. Both of you participated in recent professional development programs for teaching multilingual learners. Can you share what you learned? And we can start with Marina.
This summer, I was lucky enough to participate in a program that was designed by Dr. Conlin Nieves from the San Joaquin County Office of Ed, called a collaborative ELD summer school modeling, focusing on LTLs, also known as long-term English learners, and professional learning. It was an intensive 3-week program where we were provided with structured, supportive environment and opportunities to apply our learning of practices designed to accelerate language and literacy development in real time. In the first week, we were provided with all the lesson plans and materials. As the weeks progressed, we were given the opportunity to adjust and to add to the lesson plans. Ultimately, the last week, we created our own lesson plans. Our students were asked to focus on writing. The focus was on this topic, the prolific plastic pollution problem. Honestly, these students came in not knowing much about the problem, and through systematic scaffolding, where they got to listen, speak, read, write, and think every day, they allowed them to use this to actively participate in their classroom collaboration with their peers. It was amazing to see the students beginning to only write few words or sentences, be able to articulate and actually write multiple paragraphs at the very end. I was told at the end of this program that hoping to expand this program next year with younger grades all the way to 1st grade. This model was just geared for 4th through 8th grade.
And Nicole, do you want to share a little bit about what you learned in the trainings that you took on teaching multilingual learners about math?
Yeah, so last year I participated in the New Teacher Project series called Good to Great. It was a few months long. We would meet a couple times each month with our trainers and other teachers. I would say my biggest takeaway from that training was that we, as educators, should always keep really high expectations for our students, no matter their language level, no matter the subject matter. So through the training, we learned the proper supports that allow our students to better access grade level content, collaborate academically with their peers, and also talked about reviewing and revising their work and their strategies.
So, thinking about that and thinking, from all of your perspective, the question for all of you, what does professional development for teachers of English learners need to have? What does it need to include, and what would make it a really good training?
For me, I think first and foremost, the feeling that it's personal, and I understand that can't always happen. But with Good to Great, we were meeting with coaches in small groups. They were emailing us individually, following up and, remembering things about our classroom and referring back to them. So that really meant a lot. And recently I had another training with a different program, and it was actually in person, which was really cool. We haven't had in-person trainings for a while. And it was one trainer with just 5 of us teachers. And, she had a slideshow and everything that she was planning on going through, but it just turned into a much more organic and collaborative meeting time where it was just focused on what we specifically needed help with. So I think that's the first thing I think of with quality professional development.
For me, the quality that I got this summer, it was hands-on, it was in person, there was collaboration, there was time for us to teach. We had co-partners, so we were able to collaborate immediately. We were able to scaffold. We were able to see the students in action, being able to write, being able to articulate words, being able to use all our walls. All our space was filled with writing. It's neat to see being able to communicate and collaborate together. That's what we need. We need to be able to have time to collaborate, actually do it, actually get feedback, talk amongst our peers, and be able to tweak. It's nothing is perfect. If we get a book and we have to read, it doesn't work that way. We have to be able to teach and be able to come back and collaborate. And that was what was given to me during the 3 weeks. And it was amazing. I was astonished to see the growth, not just of myself of learning, but the growth of my 13 students and 14 students that I had in my classroom. It was just really neat to see.
Elvira.
I just want to appreciate the voices of our amazing educators who are in our space today and those that are joining us across the nation, and recognizing that part of quality professional learning is identifying the systemic opportunities to be able to articulate and bring coherence to the experiences that are being shared here today by Marina and Nicole. And so my colleague, Veronica Torres McLean, who serves as our Assistant Director for Professional Learning, has put in the chat a resource from the state of California that really points to one chapter, and particularly by Santos and Hopkins. It signals the importance of developing educator capacity with systems level design and collaboration central to supporting English learners. And one of the aspects of that we know aligned to our California policy for the English Learner Roadmap is to think about what type of system conditions and can support effectiveness in building educator capacity. And so I want to give a specific example from a school district that has an English Learner Master Plan, Oxnard School District, and we'll drop that link in the chat. And they have had cross collaboration across departments to really think about what is effective professional development for educators of English learners, beyond our teachers, really thinking about counselors, administrators, other leaders in our context. What will it take to bring alignment and coherence? And they signal in their English Learner Master Plan 3 key components. The first is that it's focused and intentional. And with that, it gives attention also across content areas. So both Marina and Nicole have highlighted the specific attention to integrating content instruction along with English language development, and the supports for us to unpack together as educators what that means in our real spaces, and to make sense of that within the initiatives that are occurring in our context. So that's the first component that they signal, with the commitment to including literacy and language focus, mathematics, other content area focus, science and history, social studies, and the commitment to unpacking what that means for both designated and integrated ELD spaces. And we heard Nicole talk about, and both Marina and Nicole talk about also the dimension of formative assessment and listening to students and responding to students and listening to each other. And so this particular district, as an example, we know there are others in the English Learner Master Plan, highlight that as a focus and intentional component. The second is that it must include reflection and coaching. And both Nicole and Marina have talked about that, to create intentional spaces for that, protocols for that, protocols that allow us to think specifically with the English learner in mind and the multiple typologies of our multilingual and English learner students. And the third dimension is that it needs to include also impact measures to really allow for us to think about continuous improvement, both for ourselves and for the system.
Natalie, do you want to add anything?
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our panelists. The only piece that I would add would be when we think about professional development for teachers, I think it would be beneficial for us to think about supporting not only multilingual teachers, but also monolingual teachers, because all of our teachers work with our emergent bilingual students. So teachers, in general, right, should examine the students' backgrounds, their experiences, and how to best connect that to the students' learning experiences, as some of our panelists here have shared. And looking at the assets that the students, right, bring into the classroom, including the language, the culture, and here's the special piece, is that they will vary depending on, the student's learning experience, depending on the different language. Vietnamese students, Korean students, Japanese students, Chinese students, Khmer students, Spanish-speaking students will bring a very different set of, assets to the classroom. So I would iterate and kind of confirm what some of our panelists have already shared. Take the time to know our students, know our parents, right? Know the community. And I think our teacher have shared the opportunity to collaborate, right? To plan the lesson, to implement, to get the feedback, is so that we can have a deeper understanding of those pieces. And how do we bring those resources into the classroom that would actually have an impact for the students in our classroom?
Actually, you mentioned parents, and I want to bring Laura into the conversation. Laura, you're a mom of an English learner. You're also the vice president of your district's English Learner Advisory Committee, and I know you're in touch with other parents. So can you tell us, what you've seen parents, asking for, as far as, more, what kind of resources and preparation, or what kind of, what do they want teachers to have?
Thank you. This could be its own session, the things that I have, and I've tried to narrow it down. And so I can list a few things, and then we can go into deeper discussion depending on the questions. But it's, genuine effort to involve parents has been a hot item. Not just say, actually provide actions, provide better communication. I think that's where it starts. Communication between the district, between teachers. And a key part of that is using language that parents will understand. A lot of the notifications and official letters are in academic language. And, we need conversational language for a lot of parents, because, a lot of parents don't understand. A lot of them don't understand English, right? First, to begin with. And then the terms being used when it's translated, they also don't understand. So that is kind of one aspect. And follow-up and accountability for parent requests or feedback from trainings, such as like the LCAP meetings where parents go and give feedback. Parents would like to know what actually happened. They'd like to receive data, and facts about what's going on, if the funds are being used in the right place, items like that. After school support is huge, whether it be homework help or tutoring. A lot of parents, again, cannot understand enough to help their students, but they want their students to excel. And then there's an ask for multilingual counselors, intervention specialists, special needs paraprofessionals, and also to promote multilingualism. We don't want our kids to feel like it's, I have to do this, or, it's a bad thing that I have this extra class because I'm not up to par. We want them to be proud of their language and continue their home language as well as the English. And then resources for our teachers. We know our teachers cannot, they have a lot on their plate. We'd like, funding and extra help, like paraprofessionals, more training and professional development options for teachers. And like Natalie said, all teachers, not just the ones that do deal with English language development, all teachers. And then there's a lot of ask for teachers to identify at the beginning of the year, to identify their students, because it has happened where in the past, some teachers don't know that their students are ill, or they don't know the levels, or they don't, their scores. So there's a lot of requests to identify the students, know their scores and levels, and push to reclassify if that's an option, and also understand the requirements to reclassify a student. And for example, one of these things for the teachers, there was a request for teachers to review the annual notification letters that go out to each parent, to review them at parent-teacher conference.
Right. The parent gets a letter that says where your child is in terms of English proficiency, but the teacher may not actually see that letter.
Exactly.
Right?
So we want to kind of bridge the gap between the teacher and the parent, and maybe even the student, so that it's like a team effort to get the student to advance, so that everybody knows where that child is and that what needs to be done. Set some goals, and maybe that's the only time the parent ever shows up to school, just because of different things going on in their lives. A lot of there isn't a lot of parent engagement sometimes. And so that initial, at least once a year, it would be great to just be on the same level with, the teacher, the student, and the parent.
Laura, I want, and this is to open it up to the group as well, those in the classroom as well. There's a question in the audience about, there has been a windfall of federal and state aid to schools as a result of the pandemic. Curious to know what your districts have done with that aid. How has it been put to use to accelerate learning after a period of time where things obviously slowed down?
So I know off the top of my head, I know they did hire more paraprofessionals. Not enough. There's a shortage of available staff, but they did hire more paraprofessionals, and they did hire specialists at the middle and high school. So where there's more of a population of students, they have designated specialists to help out there. Those are the two that come to mind that I know that have been funded from that money.
What about the other district?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What about
What about the other districts here? Marina and Nicole, if you want to share, if some of that funding has gone towards the kind of supports that
the funding is there, and our district is trying to hire more paraprofessionals, but as Laura stated, there's not that many out there. We have a shortage, but the money is there, and it's geared to help the LCAP, help the ELs advance. I know as a teacher, we're given the opportunity during the summer to attend paraprofessional trainings. It's like a 3-day things that we get to decide where to go. And many of us decide to go to the ELD one. I know the San Joaquin County Office of Ed has a ton of resources for ELD. I was able to go after my 3-week, I was able to attend a 3-day in-service about designated ELD, what integrated ELD looks like in a classroom. And it was kind of nice to see that. So there are opportunities in our district to advance. And there is they have meetings where they invite parents through Zoom to come in, talk about it, what their needs are. Just like Laura was saying, our district does that with our parents. It's the parents if they want to join.
Do you, Marina and Nicole, do you feel like, what do you feel like you and your colleagues, need more of to support English learners?
Where do I start? Time in the day. It's really hard to balance, all the various responsibilities. With more funding comes more programs, and obviously that's great. And we want to be doing everything we can to support our students, but it gets pretty hard to juggle all of these new things. Like, for example, this year, my school is piloting 3 separate programs. So I'm really grateful that I did the Good to Great program last year, because genuinely, I don't know if I would have the time this year because of these other things that, districts decide for us. So it's tough to balance for sure.
There's
Marina?
another question. Oh, sorry, Marina, go ahead.
Can you, sorry.
Oh, just if it was just what do you feel like you and your colleagues need more of to support English learners?
I agree with my colleague Laura. Time. There's a lot of things that we need to do now. We have our designated CEEL. We have our math time. We have a new math curriculum. We have to have our designated ELD time. Everybody has 30 minutes of ELD time. We have our integrated ELD time where we get to integrate everybody together. It's just time consuming, and where do we allocate that time and structure to be able to fulfill everybody's needs, not just the ELLs, but everybody in turn, because everybody needs time.
Elvira and Natalie, there's a question in the audience that maybe you can help answer about virtual independent study school. That there is a lot of English learner students in this district who choose this type of school for fear of maybe dealing with their school district. Is there any research that that shows what can be done to make those programs more successful?
So we learned a lot from the pandemic, and we really explored what some of the essential components are that needed to be in the virtual space that we know were in real life space. In fact, through our center's work, and we can follow up with a link on this, we put forth a series of communications where we highlighted what our innovative teachers and teachers who were nominated across the state did for different types of English learners, newcomer students, long-term English learner students, and what some of the main areas of focus were that created most effective spaces when we had to shift so much into virtual learning. So one thing that we know needs to be part of the work in independent spaces is the opportunity for designated English language development, and thinking critically about how to create spaces where we can continue to focus on oral language development as one of the facets that we know is the most important in developing language and supporting particularly multilingual and English learner students. We saw from what we learned is that needed to be there. The other is the focus on interdisciplinary instruction. So the time that Nicole and Marina highlight as really needing to be part of a solution is identifying ways of maximizing time and bridging that with the strength of the colleagues. And thinking about how we can learn from each other, with each other, and plan intentionally to be able to integrate interdisciplinary practices that are rich in language and literacy learning while addressing content, and simultaneously think intentionally about how to create those daily designated ELD opportunities for students.
I would also add, with virtual learning environment, it actually opens up a lot of opportunities and a lot of things that we haven't thought as being possible. And I'm going to share an example. Kind of a sideline, but somewhat related. And so because of COVID, a lot of the community heritage language schools, shut down physically, right? And so what we did at the National Resource Center for Asian Languages opened up a virtual language programs, right? So initially thinking about supporting not only, just language development in general, right? But also heritage language development through this virtual platform. And some of the pieces that really made us think about is the lesson design and being very strategic and being very intentional about who our learners are, like the interface, right? Which is very different. So you can't take a lesson that you had planned for a face-to-face environment and apply that instruction. And this is what Elvira was mentioning earlier, into the virtual platform and say it's going to go well. It's not going to go well, right? So you have to not only prepare yourself with some of the more technological, tools that can assist, and thinking about the learner's perspective sitting in front of that school. Now, the other surprising piece that we found through this program is parental engagement. Parents are there, and sometimes they're just a screen away, and sometimes they're physically sitting there with their child, right? Scaffolding the process. So I think there are a lot of opportunities that can be learned in this process that I think we haven't thought about. This is all new for us, and I'm excited to read some of the research that will follow, I imagine.
That's actually something that many districts have shared with us in general, that because of distance learning, they just started doing different kinds of parent engagement. I think that's something that across the board I've heard. Elvira, you recently co-authored a report that was analyzing these district local control accountability plans, LCAPs, that Laura was talking about, and what they include for English learners. And I'm curious, can you just share what kinds of trends you found in terms of professional learning? What kinds of professional learning districts are actually providing for teachers?
Absolutely. Our center has led the research efforts in collaboration with Californians Together over the last 7 years in the implementation of the local control and accountability plans, or the LCAPs. And these are plans that districts are required to write as a result of the implementation of the local control funding formula, now 9 years into the implementation of it. We just published our 4th report, and we've consistently examined the LCAPs of districts who serve the highest numbers and highest percentages of English learners. In this last report, we included 26 public school districts, and together these districts serve 30% of the English learners in the state of California. That's a pretty significant sampling, and it gives us a lot of confidence in the sampling for that. With the last revision of the template that came from advocacy efforts as a result of the findings from our prior reports, we had a new opportunity with AB 1840 to sharpen the focus on English learners. And what I want to share is just some brief highlights of what the requirements were from the districts in terms of really delineating specified services, goals, actions, and services for English learners, a lot of which Laura touched on previously. So the first one is that districts are required to describe language acquisition programs. And so we can't really look at professional learning in a vacuum, because it is coupled with the way in which we're describing and designing programs for multiple types of English learners. And so what did we find? We found that there were overall in the LCAPs limited descriptions of programs, actions, and services that spoke to the specificity of the types of English learners. So some room for improvement there. The second requirement for districts was that they needed to consider how to include specific EL metrics or measures of how to close the gap. And what we found there is that there's also room for growth. We found a conspicuous absence of differentiated growth targets. All of these lead
Meaning, let me just explain really quick what
Yes.
that means, because I feel like I needed to look at the example for that.
Yes.
One of the example that I read that made the most sense to me was like the graduation rate, that a district might look at and say, oh, we're going to raise our graduation rates overall by 6%, but they're not looking at, then of course that would mean that English learners are going to go up 6%, and so are everyone else, and so the gap would remain.
That's absolutely right. And so if we're looking at closing the gap, we need to have a different target for English learners so that we can reduce that gap. And graduation rate is an example of that. The academic performance measures for English language arts and mathematics are other examples of that. And we highlight in our report different bright spots. So we have examples of how districts, for example, thought about the types of metrics that they could include for English learners, and then look strategically at how to ensure that there were opportunities to close that gap. So that was a second requirement and an opportunity, an invitation for districts. The third was around the requirement to describe professional learning for educators of English learners. And what we found here is that we still see a privileging of professional development or professional learning on content standards or materials, independent of attention to the integration of ELD standards. So the result is a description of disconnected professional learning versus integrated and coherent professional learning, which is what we hear Nicole and Marina really asking for and finding great value in as they described their recent experiences in professional learning. We noticed that there was a relationship between how districts and their LCAPs defined comprehensive English language development programs and instruction, and the development of corresponding professional learning to support implementation. We looked also at how districts and their LCAPs were uplifting the potentiality of the California English Learner Roadmap and the principles in the English Learner Roadmap that really serve as our policy guidance and need to be part of the fabric of the work of every district and present in multiple plans, starting with the LCAP, where critical decisions are made about resourcing. Laura pointed to that. What are we resourcing? How are we resourcing? And how are we ensuring that we're making that time that Marina and Nicole called for? So there's only a number of hours in the day. How do we support that time within that? We found primarily broad descriptions, like we're going to provide support to English learners to improve English language development standards implementation, but not necessarily a through line with direct actions that would help really stitch together the plan that districts might have. And
kind of not explaining exactly what kind of professional development they were going to provide, or what kind of course that would look like, or what kind of program they were going to provide extra for students, correct?
Yes, Heidi, and it's hard to put everything in the LCAP. We recognize that. And so we did see where there was more coherence across plans, that there were some districts that did point to their English Learner Master Plan. And I mentioned earlier about one example. There are others in the state of California that have that as well. But what were some of the successful bright spots? So how can we make it possible to delineate that in the LCAP? Well, the first are examples of some districts who described what their systems were, what their resources were, what the infrastructure was. So we have coaches, we have leaders, we collaborate across our departments to ensure that we provide spaces for educators to learn about how to deliver designated ELD and integrated ELD. And we do this with attention to our variety, our different types of English learners, our newcomers, our long-term English learners, and even the variations of profiles within that. We saw language that specified sustained efforts with leadership, coaching, and the resources for collaboration specifically, and really uplifting the expertise of teachers such as the teachers that we have on our panel today to come together to collaborate. We saw examples such as we want 100% of the professional learning by our Education Services Division to include strategies for universal design for learning, social emotional learning, language development, and parent engagement.
Right, so that was included in everything. That makes sense.
Absolutely. I just want to mention one other thing is that importance that we saw in not many districts, but we did see some uplift the provision of ethnic studies within their expectations for professional learning. And we saw others that also had a stated commitment and support for the use of primary language, including for teachers who may not own the primary language of all the students that they serve, but to really highlight strategies for all.
Well, that's a good segue, actually, because I wanted to ask Natalie, I know you've worked with many school districts to set up dual language immersion programs in Asian languages. And, what kinds of preparation and resources or challenges do teachers and districts need for that kind of work?
Well, thank you. And I appreciate this, the spotlight and the inclusion of Asian languages in this conversation. This is something that is often, off the table. And so happy to be here. So I've had the opportunity to work with numerous school districts in the country to support particularly dual language immersion programs in Asian languages. In terms of teacher preparation, it is very similar to what dual language immersion teachers would need in other languages, right? So in addition to obtaining a teaching credential, the teachers would also need to obtain the bilingual authorization in the specific language. And that can be, Vietnamese, Chinese, Korean, Tagalog, Spanish. So this can be satisfied by passing the exam or enrolling in 2 courses that focus on language, culture, and pedagogy. Now, at Cal State Fullerton, we have bilingual authorization for Vietnamese, Korean, Khmer, which is Cambodian, and Spanish. And we also work with the Asian Language Consortium in the CSU system, all 23 campuses, to support the various language programs, including Chinese, Hmong, and Tagalog. And through the National Resource Center for Asian Languages at Cal State Fullerton, we also provide professional development for our Asian language teachers on various topics that you would imagine. Improving academic language, right? Student oral language production, student engagement through various instructional practices, assessments, parent and community engagement is a huge component when we talk about dual language immersion programs. In terms of, resources, depending on the language, teachers need, in general, from my experience, they need instructional materials, right? And you'll hear this over and over again, right? Curriculum, books, assessments. But I think one of the critical element is not just any instructional materials, but having authentic materials. Right. So these are the materials that reflect the students' experiences and that would allow them to make the connection, right, to the assets that they bring to the classroom that are essential to the success and the quality of the program. Along with districts and school support, I think parental and community engagement are other key ingredients, but I cannot emphasize, and for those of you who work in dual language context, know that translation, it's good, great, right? I mean, it's better than not having any resources at all. But I think the best resources come from those from the community, and they gotta be authentic and they gotta reflect those experiences.
Actually, I think several of the questions that people who were coming to this roundtable asked us beforehand had to do with, how, what do teachers need in order to teach different kinds of English learners? And so people were asking about, English learners in middle and high school might need different kinds of instruction than students in elementary school. Students who just arrived from another country students who, may not have been in school for several years, or students who have been in school since kindergarten, but who have not yet mastered English, and so are long-term English learners, but have different experiences and different, of course, needs than students who have just arrived. And so, what do teachers need to know in order to serve those students better? And this is a question for everyone. Teachers and Laura can also jump in. Anyone want to start?
I think for me, something new that I've learned is the supports that the students are technically allowed to have based on, are they a newcomer? Are they ELL? And those are different depending on how long they've been in the country. So an example I have is I have a student who only came to our school for about 3 weeks last year. She was in Mexico for the rest of the time. She is in my class now, and she's been with us the whole year so far, which is great. But she's not considered a newcomer anymore because technically she was at our school for 3 weeks last year. And so technically, from a district standpoint, she's not supposed to be using the curriculum for newcomers. Which was interesting to me to find that out. And, we have this curriculum available. It's part of our language arts curriculum. They have a little smaller program built for newcomers of upper elementary grades. So it's more mature. It's not just reading the dog ran, it's things that they want to learn about, and it's presented in a way that they want to learn about. So I was a huge advocate of my student wanting to learn this curriculum, despite technically not a newcomer anymore. So I don't know. I see that as kind of a little bit of a flaw. And I know there's so many more logistics that go into how to define a student and whatnot, but that was just my personal experience this year.
I go next. As an English language learner, when I was growing up, I learned English. I would go to Mexico for 6 months, stay here for 6 months. So it was very difficult for me to acquire both languages at the same time because I always went to school. I went to school full time. I never had a break. So as I got proficient in English and I got RFEP in 4th grade, I was able to help the newcomers that would come in. They would allow me to be like their guide growing up. And as I went through high school, I got to be like a guide. They got to see me. I was like their little teacher. I think that's why I also like to be a teacher, because I was able to promote that. When I taught junior high and I taught migrant ed, I had students that were newcomers. I had students that were long-term ELLs. And I did a lot of scaffolding. I did a lot of cognates. I spoke softly. I spoke in complete sentences, not complex sentences. Just I had them repeat. It was a lot of repetition, a lot of modeling, a lot of realia. It was just, it's kind of neat. They're like little sponges. Now that I teach 1st graders, I had a little newcomer during COVID. He did not speak anything. He spoke Arabic. And it was astonishing to see him learn a little by little the English. Our district has a program for our level 1s, which is Rosetta Stone. And I got to see his little progress every day. When I had my designated ELD, and I would branch out and I would say, okay, now you're going to go do your Rosetta Stone. I was able to see him on Bloxy, him trying all those things. And if he made a mistake, he would go back. And now he's in 3rd grade and his English is amazing. He's able to have a little conversation with me now. He's able to say good morning. He's able to have more friends now. Before he was just like a little secluded, and now he's able to branch out. So
Elvira.
Well, I want to share that what I heard from both Nicole and Marina is that our teachers are the greatest advocates for the students. And one of the things that we know about newcomers especially is that there's not one common definition. There's a recommendation, there's a range of years, but what we do know is what we should provide in the classroom, regardless of the materials and resources. And part of the effectiveness of a professional learning program is that we equip ourselves as educators to assess the resources that we have and to be able to fill in the gaps and respond to the type of English learners. So for newcomers, we know that we'll provide them with specialized integrated ELD that the role of primary language support will remain critical regardless of where they are in their trajectory, and that there is that commitment to also an orientation to a new space inclusive of the families, and to really be able to uplift also the strengths and assets that they come with, and really be able to attend to the cultural and global competencies that they can develop. We know, and we've heard Marina and Nicole highlight that opportunity to leverage cultural and linguistic backgrounds to support speaking as a second important consideration for both working with newcomers as well as long-term English learners, to continue to build vocabulary in a way that's integrated in content instruction, to support reading and to support writing, really centering the oral language development as well. For long-term English learners, we have a new report released by Californians Together. We'll drop that in the chat as well. And it's entitled Renewing Our Promise. And it provides for us an excellent resource. It's a call to action for all of us in and out of the classroom to be able to think about the specialized programs for also different types of long-term English learners, long-term English learners that our systems created. So I point back to really thinking about having an English learner master plan, a plan and resources to support that, and identifying what to be able to do to really be able to be responsive to our context as well.
Natalie?
I would like to share that my colleagues, Fernando Rodriguez Valls, founded the Summer Language Academy along with Allison Dover, and also developed the Saturday Language Academy to support language development for newcomers, working with high school students from Anaheim Union High School District in Orange County. And I've had the opportunity to visit the classroom and to see in action. And the approach has been very effective. And they are effective because they focus on not only language development, but also promoting identity development along with language development. In other words, you cannot teach language in isolation, right? Because language development needs to be contextualized and tied to the identity, the history, the culture, and using language as a vehicle to foster the growth and the personal development. And I found that model to be very effective for high school students. So just kind of want to share that. I think there was a question in the audience regarding finding the balance between authentic resources versus sort of like academic language, right? And this is an example, actually, the Summer Language Academy and the Saturday Language Academy. It's when you're able to see the academic language that students, because they're high school students, they have in their home language, right? It gets introduced to the classroom while they're learning English at the same time. So I don't necessarily think they are on the opposing end, that you have to, compromise one to get the other. I think they can coexist if we're allow the students to kind of bring that in, right? And co-constructing the lessons with the students.
That's a great example of asset-based education. Several of you were also English learners growing up, and I would love for you to share some of your experiences growing up and kind of how they inform, your work today. And I'd love to start with Lauda.
Yes, thank you. Mine was a long time ago, okay? Many, many years. And one of the reasons I'm here is because I was shocked when I went to one of my first DLAC meetings, and there was discussion about what our kids needed. And, someone made a comment like, oh, sometimes kids fall through the cracks, or sometimes, we're still working on it. And I'm like counting, in my head, I'm like, how have we not advanced? How are we still working on this? 35 years later, and we still don't have a plan for our teachers to follow. We don't have a plan for our kids. It was, to me, I was pretty frustrated. That's one of the things that led me to be more of an advocate for ELs, because frankly, I don't remember even having anything other than just learning at school. I remember also being a resource for kids, other kids that came and didn't speak English. So I was like a translator, which is kind of what I see my son doing now in first grade with a new student, because the teacher doesn't have the resource to, speak to that one child who speaks no English. And so, yeah, I was just, I'm trying to find ways as a parent to support my teachers, because they're doing an amazing job, and I feel that they don't have the resources. And I wish that we could collaborate and ask together, with our teachers and parents, and see what we can get from a district level to support them.
Marina?
I'm not gonna lie, it was difficult. Going back and forth. My parents were migrant workers, so going back and forth. I was born and raised in Lodi, so I attended Lodi Unified schools, and the teachers would give me packets. That was my homework for the 4 months I was in Mexico. I had a huge packet. I didn't know how to read. I didn't know what a noun was. I didn't know what a verb was. I didn't actually, when I would return, the teacher never took, she just assumed she knows it. She looks white, she knows it. And they would just trickle me on. I didn't learn those until I was almost in high school, college level. And now that I'm actually teaching the first graders, and this is my 9th year teaching first grade, I can actually take the time and actually explain to them the importance of what a noun is, the importance of what grammar is, because it's throughout our entire school year. They're going to have to scaffold and learn and do all of these things. That's my take. For me as a parent, I'm a parent of 3 children. They attended a dual language immersion for Spanish. That's where I used to teach. And my ex-husband and I, we wanted them to be truly bilingual. We spoke Spanish at home, but I wanted my children to be able to read and write. And I learned how to read and write in Spanish because I attended Mexico schools. So I wanted the same situation. I wasn't able to take my children every 6 months to Mexico. I wanted them to learn. So as an EL, my children were ELs. I made sure that they got ELD. I made sure they were redesignated and if they fall through the crack, I got that letter, and I went to the teacher, and I had my daughter accountable, and I made the instructor also know that we are together. We are a team. It's not just me as an educator. It's not me as a parent. We have to be cohesive as a unity, because if we're all working together, our children will succeed.
So that's a Vietnamese immigrant and what you call, quote unquote, a boat person. I don't know if you remember, in the late 80s and early 90s. I came to the US speaking 3 languages, and they included Vietnamese, Cantonese, because I was in Hong Kong refugee camps for a couple of years, and then English because I was again in another refugee camp in the Philippines. So I was in the pull-out ESL program when I came to Houston, Texas. I was taught mostly, I remember English through the use of flashcards. So somebody would come to my class, they would pull me out, and then they would show me flashcards, and they would ask me to repeat, right? And then they would turn to the back and they'll ask me to memorize. But one thing that stood out from that experience is that I think the teachers that I had at the time assumed that I didn't know math or any other content areas because of my English proficiency was still developing. They didn't know that math was the easiest subject and it was not challenging for me. And so I'm going to, I guess, take this moment. And as you can see, the danger with that approach is that if you don't speak English, you can't learn any other content subject areas. I would encourage all of us to think about that for a second. And how many times have we made, those assumptions, right, about our students? Because I was one of those students. So in the work that I do today, whether it's through the center at Cal State Fullerton or on the various grant projects, is to, certainly to provide language-rich environments, if not always at the forefront of my work. Because and I think I am the product of that emergent bilingualism, that plural lingual education, right? And so I think when we think about language learning, it's much more sophisticated. It's not simply the mastery of a particular language, as I've shared earlier, in terms of the identity development that I think we need to deeply integrate it into the conversations and the practices and the policy. Because I think if we focus on language proficiency in isolation, I fear that we are missing the boat.
Elvira, do you have anything else to add before we go into the last question?
I just, the experience so much resonate with my experience as an English learner. I remember very vividly being in preschool and not feeling welcomed even at that age. My parents didn't feel welcomed. I was then the product of busing, where I was bused for the purposes of integration, just a few miles away, but feeling even more unwelcomed. I felt that my language wasn't accepted. We were in the back of the room. I was also pulled out for, I wasn't sure what, but the teacher was telling me about spiders in the corner, and I couldn't really understand why or how that had anything to do with it. And I was already reading, yet I was put in these very low level books in first grade where I didn't understand why. I remember finally, when I was in third grade, coming into a classroom where I had a teacher who valued my language. She asked me to go home and ask my parents, what are the common dichos or sayings that your family knows? And I thought, someone values what I bring. And that was a turning point for me. And it was in third grade that I knew I wanted to be an educator, and that I knew we had a lot of work to do. And so being part of our Center for Equity for English Learners here at Loyola Marymount, and after a 34-year trajectory as an educator, being just so grateful for the educators who walk alongside us in this journey with a commitment to equity and excellence, and thinking about the systems work that we have yet so much work to do, because the words that were said to my sister, to myself, to my son, you're not college material, think about another trajectory, are still alive today. We have work to do.
We don't have much time left, so I want to just go around one really very briefly for everyone, just to say the one thing they would like, districts and educators to think about doing more of for English learners. So we start with Nicole.
I think just to reiterate what I think all of us have been saying is to appreciate the native languages of our students and make sure that they know that they are valued, but also that we expect great things from all of our students. And for teachers to remember to keep these high expectations and keep the positive support going. And it's not just about the right answers. It's not just about, getting to the number, when I'm talking about math problems and whatnot, it's just a general understanding of the language and the situation, and being able to celebrate every little step along the way to give our students the confidence they need to access grade level content, despite what reading level they might be at, for example.
Okay, everybody just give me 2 words. Laura? Or a sentence.
Just acknowledge each child's strengths and differences, and promote that everybody has something to give. Yes, and then just try to get everyone to work together, and because we're all trying to get our kids to the same endpoint.
Marina?
To tell them that their language is powerful, to keep on trying, to never give up.
Natalie?
I say to invest in your teachers, to support them. They are your greatest asset and your greatest advocate.
Elvira?
Celebrate the cultural and linguistic gifts that our communities bring to our school context and support ourselves as educators to be able to make sure that we're unwrapping the potential for all of our students so that we make our multilingual learners and English learners visible.
Thank you to all of our panelists today, and also to Sobrato Philanthropies, who is our funder. And you can listen to our recording and find more resources on our website, edsource.org.